Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Kirby Squeak Squad. In the last part we finished off Cushy Cloud and started off Jam Jungle, and now we're gonna go finish this world off and start off the next one on top of that. This, off the top of my head, is actively one of my favorite levels in the game, because the door's right there, of course, but we have an entire side area to go through to find all the chests here, and I don't know why, specifically levels that do this in this game, where the exit's directly in front of you, but you have the option to go after the chests, I just find a lot more rewarding to do for some reason. I think it's like the Metroid in me, or the RPG side quest in me, where the main pathway's right there, but there's all this stuff over here I find very appealing. Which might explain why I've apparently had less issues with Elden Ring so far than some people, because, yeah, just to talk about what I've been playing a lot lately on my own time, because I haven't done that much recently, especially through all of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. This last year or so has largely been me working through either new releases or finally working my way through the Soulsborne stuff just to see what I like about it so far. There's been ups and downs, but about 40 hours into Elden Ring, I'm enjoying my time with that. Continuing our quest to talk about this game's development staff, though, the next role in the credits is creative support, where there's only one person credited, Masanobu Yamamoto. However, they've actively been around in the industry since the mid-90s, and they're still credited decently regularly. Their first role is as a CG designer back on Starblade for the 3DO and PlayStation. They did computer graphics for Zeitgeist on the PlayStation, Galaxian 3rd, or Cubed, I guess, technically on the PS1, they were CG designer. But they were the main designer for Pokemon Snap, as well as the Snap Station, as well as Kirby 64. After that, they just were on the creative support and supervising team for a lot of things moving forward on Kirby, Air Ride, Canvas Curse, Squeak Squad, Epic Yarn. And that dates all the way through to the modern releases, being a HAL game supervisor for Ultimate, special thanks to Star Allies, Bye Bye Box Boy, in fact the entire Box Boy trilogy there, and special thanks in general. So they're still loosely involved in the production angle there. Pressing the switch in this upcoming room is going to make the large chest spawn in, and grabbing that's going to cause Spinny to spawn in, and we're going to have another chase to go on here. Now, something I haven't noted yet when it comes to the Squeaks grabbing the chest from you if they damage you along the way, is that if you try to chase them into the cave that they can escape into, like that one right there, you need to actively wait for them to go all the way into that, like let their entering animation finish before you follow them in, because you can accidentally beat them in there, and that will cause them, and thus the chest, to despawn on that specific run. Not the worst in some stages, but definitely annoying, especially if you're just committed to the fact that you've lost that chest to them ahead of time. I've had that happen to me more times than I'd like to admit. In fact, when I was doing a practice run for this, it happened at least 3 times, so, oops. Right there we got the ability scroll for the ice ability, by the way, which is the same thing as the ability scroll for the fire ability. Off the top of my head, just allows you to aim the ice slightly up or down, which has its uses, but definitely feels a little underwhelming compared to some of the other ability scrolls. This stage is one of the hardest chests to get to the game. There's only one chest here, but it's rough. What it is we're going to be chasing the chest down this entire gigantic vertical hallway as the bomb block slowly destroys the platforms it lands on. The 3 abilities they give you in the starting room definitely all lead into this ability in some way or manner. Metal is actually really good for the latter part here, since you can just roll down on it. With that said, I don't get this one first try, so, oops. Thankfully, while Kirby has moments of being relatively unforgiving like that, they're usually at least kind enough to have the stage either be a shorter one because of it, or have faster ways to get back to it. In that regard, from the top of my head, Amazing Mirror is a bit of a rarity in that regard, because there's times where if you miss a chest in that game, the route to get back to it is really roundabout, and it sucks, but thankfully that's not as common here in Squeak Squad. Thinking about it off the top of my head, I want to see the Kirby game I've played that has perhaps the most cruel backtracking and needed resets if you miss an ability to get a specific collectible within a stage might be 64? But I haven't played 64 at this point in several years. Technically speaking, I was meant to do that before this one, but I decided to do this one first because I looked at the game and went, yeah, you know what, sure. Notably, in that stage, we get the ability scroll for Laser, which just allows you to charge a stronger laser. That is pretty powerful, but given the lack of movement while you're charging it from memory, not my favorite. Boss of Jam Jungle is Yadgaine. This boss is constantly moving, so you do need to be on the move to avoid being overtaken by it while dodging the rocks and Gordos that drops as it walks, the rocks it tries to throw at you outright with its arms, the lasers it can fire out of its mouth and all that. Though notably, as you do damage to it, it'll slowly lose limbs and even its main mount, so it will lose access to some attacks as you go. My preferred ability for this fight's actually Cutter, if only because it allows me to stay on the move while constantly throwing damage at a pretty fixed rate. With that said, if you're not careful, it's also very easy to take a lot of hits here pretty quickly. I think when it's on its last breath, it can try to do a self-destruct attack, but I don't think I've ever seen that actively go off, so I'm not even sure what it really does. So, with Jam Jungle now concluded, it's time for us to move on to World 5. Welcome to Vocal Volcano. I love the background here, but mind you, Kirby in general just has really good backgrounds. Really just in general, but especially starting in like Superstar, moving forward onto the Game Boy Advance and all that. The DS era, I think, is some of my favorite sprite work for its backgrounds that I can think of, period. Moving on to the game's development staff, next up is the debug team, which is made up of Ryuki Kurooka, Masaru Kobayashi, Senji Hirose, as well as the HAL debug team and NOA product testing. The three people that are named individually there, Kurooka's first role was on Eggerland Meikyu no Fukatsu, which is effectively the first Adventures of Lolo game without being, I believe, Adventures of Lolo 1, because I think what Lolo 1 is over here in the West is technically them combining level layouts from like 2 or 3 separate games, I want to say. So they technically started with HAL. They were then on Rollerball in the NES as a debugger, Hyperzone, Team Hyperzone, Arcana, they were one of the main programmers, Alcahesta programmer, Superstar, they were a project manager, and then they were also the same for Dreamland 3, Star Stacker, Smash 64 even, assistant manager for Kirby 64, manager in general for Melee, and then they were on Kirby moving forward as like project management on our ride, debug for Amazing Mirror, testing for Canvas Curse. They were on debug for, as well as they were in the special thanks for Pokemon Ranger, and their most recent credits are in Clash of the Titans, the video game, as well as Majin the Forsaken Kingdom on the PS3 as project management for Engines Incorporated. Masaru Kobayashi, on the other hand, started their career technically with Melee as a designer. They were then in the special thanks for Nightmare in Dreamland, design support in Air Ride, coordinator for HAL for Amazing Mirror, but then since then they've largely been in debug and testing, starting with Canvas Curse, this, Superstar Ultra, P-Cross 3D. Really, if it's a Kirby game that's released since a Box Boy game or P-Cross 3D since, they were involved in the testing. Dream Buffet, Forgotten Land, Battle Royale, Blowout Blast, all the spin-offs and mainline games alike. Senji Hirose, on the other hand, started with Kirby's Dream Course in the special thanks section. They were then a designer on Smash 64, special thanks for a fishing game on the N64, as well as Kirby 64. Debug team on Melee, special thanks to Nightmare in Dreamland and Air Ride, testing on this. And their last 2 roles, at least on mobile games, were on Squeak Squad and Pokemon Ranger as a debug and special thanks specifically. So right there we got the ability scroll for Parasol. I don't think I used that ability the entire LP. It does the usual things it's done since Kirby's Adventure. Slows your descent when you jump with it out. You can attack with it to send a slight shockwave forward and all that, and hold it out to bounce back for some projectiles. I believe its ability scroll makes the Parasol larger, and it can fire out stars when you hold it out in front of you, or something along those lines. Parasol has always been an ability that I've found cute, but never really liked using. Make sure you have fire or ice right here, by the way, because it's the only way you can reach this switch to get the first chest in the stage, or right over here. And be careful of the lava, because, get this, it really hurts. In that regard, you probably could do a lot with just getting an ice ability here, because that does allow you to effectively freeze some of the lava in place and make it into safe platforms. And in fact, for at least one level, we're going to need to do that to get a chest here in this world, but it can just generally help your survivability if you're just trying to get through the stages first before you get the chests for some reason. So since the other people listed in debug outright are the debug team and NOA product testing, let's talk about the debug support team that was the assistant QA testers. There are 4 people listed for that: Masahiro Takeuchi, Kenshiro Ueda, Masakazu Miyazaki, and Yuji Ichijo. Going down that list, Masahiro Takeuchi started on Kowloon's Gate on the PS1 as a test player. They were a debugger on this. Mutants in Manhattan on the Xbox One, they were with Pull to Win Company Limited. Nier Automata's PC release, they were on the Czech staff, so more debug staff. Same with the Become as Gods edition on XB1 and other consoles. Strangers of Paradise, FF Origin, they were a QA coordinator, and then they were a coordinator once again on Visions of Mana. Kenshiro Ueda, this is their only credit. Meanwhile, Masakazu Miyazaki started on Metroid Prime 2 Echoes and Daigasso Band Brothers as a coordinator. Prime Pinball, they were a supervisor, rather. Squeak Squad, debug support. Next notable game that I really recognize the name of is Lego City Undercover on the Wii U as a producer. And they are still working with specifically smaller side projects, or Metroid specifically, because they were a project supervisor on Samus Returns. Snipper Clips, they were a project manager. WarioWare Get Together, they were project manager. Dread, they were an advisor. Metroid Prime Remaster, they were on project management. WarioWare Move It, same deal. The most recent credits as of last year were special thanks in Emio the Smiling Man, which, man, that game got dark. Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door remake and Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon Switch releases, they were also on project management there. Worth noting, level 5-3 here is one that's decently common in a lot of the Kirby platformers, at least, where it's just a mini-boss rush where you need the ability of the mini-boss in question to probably get the next notable collectible. Hence why we needed Bonker's Hammer to get the first treasure chest here. We're going to need... I actually don't know the name of this specific mini-boss because I think they're only in this game. We need the animal ability from them to get the next one after that and all that. I generally like these stages, but that said, my least favorite one is probably still a Nightmare in Dreamland / Kirby's Adventure, despite me liking how there's 2 different routes you can do in that one if you find the little secret area. Meanwhile, the final person in debug support, Yuji Ichijo, they started as a coordinator on Mario Strikers on the GameCube, then they did this. They were coordination on Strikers Charge, special thanks to Superstar Ultra, coordination on Punch-Out Wii, same with DKC Returns. Mario Kart 7, they were on planning. Trine 2 Director's Cut of all things, they were on special thanks. Dark Moon, they were in special thanks. DKC Returns 3D coordination. As of their more recent credits, Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp, they were a production manager, coordinator on Sparks of Hope, Mario and Rabbids. Mario Kart Live Home Circuit of all things, they were a development coordinator. So they're still usually involved in planning, management, or coordination in a lot of projects today. Worth noting, off the top of my head, this is one of the few stages where when you grab the large chest, a Squeak doesn't immediately spawn in, because Starro waits until you reach the next room and you're forced into another fight with him. Having another breath type ability can be really recommended here, but also you can really see the potential that you can do with Wheel here. With that said, you can also see where the weaknesses about mistiming movement with Wheel can really come into play, because if you start turning too early, you become pretty vulnerable and all that. But at the same time, you really get to see Wheel also does some pretty good damage, all things considered. The next category in the credits for this game are the coordinators. There's 3 of them. Norihiko Kawabata, Yoichi Yamamoto, and Hiroaki Suga. Norihiko Kawabata started as a member of the publishing staff for SNK, I believe in specific, on Kodelka on the PlayStation. Then they were in the special thanks for Sacred Stones, coordinator for Amazing Mirror, coordinator on this, but then they were with Capcom largely after that, seemingly in some form. Because after this, every single credit that they're in is a special thanks in Capcom projects, largely Lost Planet 2, Dead Rising 2 and Case Zero, the Capcom Arcade Cabinet, and Dead Rising 2's PS4 re-release. Yoichi Yamamoto, on the other hand, started as a director, actually, for Pokemon Snap, after which they were a producer on Pokemon Channel, Pokemon Ranger, they were a producer, so they're actively more involved with Creatures Incorporated and, I'm assuming, Game Freak in some form. Even being a producer to this day, and then special thanks in things like new Pokemon Snap, Detective Pikachu, Mario Maker, all that. Their last active direct credit was Kirby's Dream Collection as a producer. The final coordinator is Hiroaki Suga, who started on Rally Cross on the VIC-20 as one of the developers and writers on that back in 1981. So one of the few developers we've talked about across me doing that on LP that's been active in game design since pre-NES revitalization of the video game industry, at least here in the United States, considering the video game crash was really only a thing for us. However, the one that's potentially about to happen because of a lot of bad things going on might be worldwide, at least this time, unfortunately. A lot of their early games are as music programmer, game design, producer programmer. They've been all over the gamut of a development team over the years. The first games I actively recognize them working on, though, are them working on a lot of the Eggerland games. So once again, Adventures of Lolo adjacent stuff. They were an uncredited music programmer for Lolo 1 specifically, so the song that never leaves my head is potentially due to them. Orkana, they were a programmer. Kirby's Adventure, they were the chief programmer. Alcahest, chief programmer. Dream Course and Wario's Woods. Map CAD programmers and sound composers. Superstar, they were in special thanks. Producer for Kirby's Dream Land 3, Star Stacker, Super Smash Bros. 1, Kirby 64. Really, they were a producer moving forward on the franchise all the way up until recently, where their last direct credit producing for Kirby was Kirby's Fighter Deluxe back in 2014, but they're still listed as a supervisor for things like Box Boy and Robobop. Robobot. I don't know why. I always say Kirby Robobop. I don't know why that's something my brain does. So right now, I'm actively using Cupid Kirby, which isn't one of my favorite abilities, though it does give you a pretty good free flying effect, similarly to the UFO ability. It's just a slower one. But I grabbed it specifically because it makes getting this chest a lot easier. Because what you're meant to do is hit that switch and then race all the way over here before the door closes. Or you could just hit it from below with Cupid's arrows and then just get it for pretty free, ultimately. I've been doing that since I was a kid. It's just ultimately the better choice. And time for one of the cases where they actually spawn the Squeak directly on top of the chest. You need to race up to go grab it before they can actively enter their cave. Though this is always one of the hardest levels to do that in. In fact, in most cases, because I believe it's Doc we're fighting here. He's probably going to actually reach the cave first, so it's time for our first look into one of these little side areas. Like I mentioned earlier in the LP, it's effectively the Meta Knight mini-bosses from Nightmare and Dreamland / Adventure. They're going to spawn a bunch of Squeakers in that you'll need to take care of on top of the major Squeak Squad member in question. Their attack pattern isn't that much different, however they do notably get a lot more aggressive after you've done enough damage and will do not only, I think, more attacks more regularly and move faster, I think they also just do more damage. What I probably should have actually done in this level, though, is after I knocked Doc out of his UFO once, swallowed the first one so I can get the UFO ability for free. Upon destroying all the enemies in one of these, the chest and door will spawn in and you can grab it and leave. Just make sure you grab the chest before you go, because I don't think it'll still be there if you re-enter it, if it's even still there to be re-entered. Because as you can see, upon defeating the Squeak and grabbing the chest, the enemies that are normally in that room will actively spawn back in. And the cave will despawn. I've lost a stupid amount of chests to that exact scenario over the years, so try to avoid that as best you can. And now we also have access to the secret stage for Vocal Volcano, which we're going to go take care of before we actually access the boss fight. We're technically finishing 2 worlds today. This is the level where you really want to make sure you grab the ice ability, as we're going to need to freeze some lava here. But the big thing about this specific level is that it's effectively a maze of sorts to find the abilities you need to access the chests present here in other rooms. If you know what you're doing, this level can be very fast, but on a first playthrough, you're probably going to be going back and forth between the rooms to figure out what you want to get where first, which honestly can help you in a long way just to help streamline things. With that said, I already know what I need, so this is going to be a pretty quick playthrough. I'm entering this room first, because not only is my first chest here that I need the ice ability for, but also it can give me the bubble of the hammer ability that I'm going to need to get a chest in a different room here. The next listed set of credits within the game's credits are the main artwork team, comprised of Tetsuya Notoya, Kaori Nishimura, Mariko Kimizuka, Reiko Kawahara, and Masayo Nakagami. Starting off with Tetsuya Notoya, they started as a GDV programmer on the original Kirby's Dream Land. Then they were a character designer for Arcana. They get a graphic design for Alcahest. They were a graphic artist on Earthbound, as well as a cooperator on the Game Boy version of Lolo 1, which is interesting. But otherwise, they're largely adjacent to HAL Laboratories' art staff, working on things like Kirby's Avalanche, an illustrator for Dreamland 3, and Sticker Star. Star Stacker, rather. Sticker Star is a radically different game by a different franchise. They were in the special thanks for Smash 64 as well as Pokemon Snap. Kirby 64, same deal. Production coordinator on a Shigesato Itoi, I think, N64 racing fishing game. Special thanks in Melee and all that. Their next artwork credit was on Amazing Mirror, and they started just doing artwork period for Kirby moving forward up until Return to Dreamland, where they seemingly just became special thanks or having artwork reused for things like Dream Collection. Kaori Nishimura, kind of similar story, a lot of character design and graphic design stuff for things like Sexy Parodius, Salamander 2, Heat 1198 graphic design team, Package Manual and HP team on Melee. But then they've just been an artist ever since, doing things like Amazing Mirror, Canvas Curse, Rumble Roses, XX of all things, funnily enough. Sonic 06, they did some dancing for, I'm assuming choreography. Squeak Squad, they were an artist here. Dragon Sinker on Android, they were on the subscript. But the only game I recognize that they were on outright after Squeak Squad was they were on Illustrator for Ashura's Wrath on the 360. Their most recent credits are on Alphadia Genesis 1 and 2 on the PS4 and the Xbox Series as chip design and main script. continue talking about the artists the game had, though, next time, because it's time for us to talk about the boss fight for Vocal Volcano, which might be my least favorite boss in the game. At the least, it's the easiest one for me to screw up on. This is Bohboh. This gigantic, weird tanuki fire owl is constantly flying and will try to do swoops across the map to either damage you outright and throw you off your game while you're trying to attack them, drop fireballs, or occasionally just charge into you outright. Whenever it charges into you outright, though, you want to try and have it aim for the rock out patches on either side of the screen, because similarly to Miss Molly, you can use that to deal damage to them and stun them for a little bit, leaving them very open to damage. My favorite power-up for this fight is largely either UFO or high jump, only because staying airborne as much as you can go a long way in this fight very quickly, but Cupid's alright as well. If you get grabbed by the dash, it just outright throws you into the lava, which not only means a lot of incoming damage, but there's a pretty good chance when it does that your ability is just going to get destroyed by the lava. So a lot of things in this fight can just go really wrong really fast. And I do believe I actually die during this specific run because I just take a lot of dumb hits like that. Most of the bosses in this game haven't really given me much guff over the years, but for some reason Bohboh here always has, alongside effectively the penultimate boss we'll end up talking about towards the end game. I understand why the latter boss does. This boss has just always tripped me up for reasons that I think are largely me just being silly. Although with that said, I've also misread this thing's sprites for years when I was on the DS. Because it's meant to just be an owl with a beak, right? For some reason, the little, like, crescent-shaped marks on its feathers. As a kid, I took that as two mouths, and I just can't see it as anything else to this day. I see angry eyes and eyebrows, a nose, and two mouths. I'm sorry if I just inflicted that upon you yourself, because ultimately this is just a cute little round owl weird tanuki fire thing. But I've never been able to read it as that since I was but a child. If you run out of luck and you don't have an ability anymore in this fight, you can either rely on doing the damage by avoiding the charges, or occasionally sucking up the fireballs or rocks you can drop from elsewhere on the screen. With that said, I've always also had trouble for some reason judging when it's going to just do the swipe across the screen, so that's why I died there. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 5, we're going to go start World 6. See you guys then.